Today I'm Junior Researcher Adam Southgate working under Senior Researcher Dr. Jenkins. This is the fourth of the Order of Merlin's training videos for new and old hunters. To begin with, I'd like to briefly discuss the large-scale incursion event that took place in North Wales a few weeks back. I realise that this may have affected you directly, as many of the master hunters who were dispatched did not return. I want to reassure you that the Order is aware of the distress and grief you may be feeling currently and would like to extend to you the Order's deepest sympathies. The High Druid has decided that to make up the numbers of master hunters, that those who have completed 3 or more years of their apprenticeship will immediately be raised to the rank of journeyman, while all active journeyman hunters who have at least taken 5 or more bounties with no more than 1 person assisting will be raised to the rank of master. Now, you should already be aware of this announcement, but if you somehow aren't, please head to your local Order office for details. The Order would also like to reassure any and all apprentice hunters who have not completed their 3 years but whose master has died that the Order will do its utmost to find a replacement for you so you can continue your education as quickly as possible. With that out of the way, today we'll be covering the Entropic Sphere and also going into a bit more detail about 2 entities in particular. We have a lot to discuss today, so I won't be going over the importance of workshops yet again. Instead, I'll be leaving our junior hunter's note talking on the subject alongside, and you can read it if you wish, but please do read the others that pertain to the topic at hand. So, the Entropic Sphere. Defined by its unchanging nature, the Entropic Sphere is most likely the most benign, but still with its own highly dangerous elements. The beings from this sphere enter our own formless, mindless, floating aimlessly and unseen. We are literally surrounded by these beings constantly. However, they are utterly incapable of interacting with anything around them until certain needs are met. What we know about these needs is that a traumatic death with a high degree of emotional distress is required, but beyond that, we are completely in the dark. Many different entities can be formed by these conditions, but we don't know if the entity that is created is dependent on the differences in these conditions. The most common and what we'll be covering today are spirits. This is where the entity takes the form of the recently deceased and also appears to remember scant pieces of the deceased's life. It must be stated that despite appearances and the held beliefs of many hunters, including the ones within the notebook, that the entities are not the ghosts of the deceased and are only mimicking them. These spirits can vary wildly in nature depending on the personality of the person they're mimicking. In the South Wales valleys, 2 spirits in particular have become famous amongst local hunters and infamous amongst us at the Order. We'll begin with Sullivan, reported to be a small boy between the ages of 5 and 6 wearing clothing matching the 1890s. Sullivan is usually spotted at the sites of previous surface-level mining infrastructure, such as pump houses and railway stations, whether they're still standing or not. He has been observed carrying out repetitive tasks once done by children at the height of the Victorian coal mining industry. His overarching goal, however, appears to be luring living mundane children into aiding him in his never-ending tasks. Due to the fact that only children around the age in which he presents are able to directly perceive him, direct monitoring is difficult and requires the full-time employment of at least 1 young child at all times to act as a detector of sorts. Adults have only ever been able to see Sullivan out of the corner of their eye, usually mistaking him for just a small child playing, or if they do then attempt to look directly, deciding that they must have misseen. Although Sullivan's actions seem mostly benign, he has led to the injury of at least 1 child who entered a derelict pump house with him, though this does not seem to be his goal. Forky, or Forky the Orky, named like Sullivan by a small boy who at least in his mind befriended them, is rather more proactive in his activities. Forky, as presented in the notebook, appears as a young boy severely disfigured by burns and usually is moving a cold facsimile of himself. Unlike Sullivan, Forky will actively seek out people of any age and will begin to lure them to remote locations, usually the remains of slag tips. He seems to have a severe emotional reaction to his face being directly observed by adults. However, he will retreat and not attack when directly observed, and will still return to continue in his goal in time. The young boy who named both Forky and Sullivan did describe long conversations the three had had. However, since him, no one has ever described either spirit communicating. In fact, Forky seems to have just as strong a reaction to people talking as when people observe his face. The child we got most of our more detailed information about the two from was only 4 during his relationship with the two, and since growing to adulthood, he only remembers them as childhood imaginary friends. The biggest issue for the Order is that to make a spirit relinquish its taken form and return to its benign state requires the body of the originally deceased person. Once located, a ritual must be performed based on the chosen beliefs of said person. This action will fool the spirit into believing that it must move on, so to speak. The issue with cases like Forky and Sullivan is that without the knowledge of who the real children were, lacking even their real names, finding their bodies is next to impossible, meaning our best course of action is isolation. However, many of our hunters disagree with this sentiment. As in the example given in the notebook, Forky will periodically lead people to recently murdered children. Though this may seem like a benevolent act, it is vital to stress that this spirit is an incursion entity and not the ghost of a young child. We are unable to communicate with it, and we have no idea what its overall goal may be. By aiding the spirit, we may be contributing to an unknown harm. Though the Order does acknowledge that these murdered children should be found and their killers brought to justice, we do not believe that an uncontrolled, wild incursion entity should be worked with in solving these cases. These fears are not without precedent, as in the case of the Green Man and many others, small communities who have elected to work with incursion entities have met with horrific ends, once the entity's esoteric goals have been met. The important thing to say is that the only time any such entity can be relied on is once they're deceased and completely under our control. It is foolishness of the highest order to believe any entity is acting purely out of benevolent intentions. At best, entities can only ever be benign and at worst, malevolent. Remember, humanity stands alone against the tide, and although some may wish for a state of a peaceful coexistence, evidence would suggest that this is highly unlikely. But I'd like to thank you very much for listening today, and I hope you take today's lesson to heart. With Arthur's might and Merlin's wisdom, thank you.